pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please note that Andrew Perkins is joining us online. Okay, it's time now for an informal public hearing. This is a time when if any citizens want to talk to the council about anything on their mind that's not on the agenda, now is the time to do that. Is there anyone in person or online that would like to speak to the council? Is there anyone in person or online that would like to comment to the council? I have to ask one more time. Is there anyone in person or on the council that would, not on the council, in person or on Zoom that would like to talk to the council? Should record that part there. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and move on to announcements. I've got a couple announcements. One of them is, remember, like you could forget, November 5th is on the way. If you are going to be out of the area, make sure that you register and vote early as absentee. That voting has already started. And Vicki loves to see people come in. And there's been someone, I knew where you use the word hack for not a better language. Someone hacked in and took my email and has been sending you guys emails. So I don't want to tell you to ignore emails from me. But if you do get something suspicious, kind of weird, let Eric know at InterQuest. He has some sort of a block that he can put in to stop that. And just for your information, tomorrow morning, you should get an email from me. Please be watching for it, especially those of you that don't open your computers too often. And this will be in regard to the annual review and evaluation of our city administrator. So be watching for that. What else we have here? Yeah, and that form will be due back again by the 14th, and then the evaluation group will put together all those statistics and have a review with Nathan and bring you the results. October 18th, if you didn't know it, at 1 o'clock at Swan Park, the chamber with K&B Trees planting a tree in memory of Uncle Bill McCullum from the radio station. So happy to see that he's getting some recognition there and be a good memorial for him. The dialysis center in Beaver Dam, it's a combined one. They closed the Waupun and the former Beaver Dam and have a really nice place where the Harley shop used to be. That is now open. They have 13 chairs in there. Hopefully none of you will have to go there, but it's really set up well for those that do have to go. There is a open house on Wednesday. There was a fake meeting today, we found out as we got there a few days early, and the wrong announcement. But it is a great center for our community, bringing people here that would normally go to other cities. They can now do this all in Beaver Dam. Also, monthly meeting for PFC is tomorrow at 5. Alderpersons are welcome to attend if they care to. And that's held up or down the first floor in the fire department's council room or their meeting room. So anybody else have announcements? Yes, Kevin. There is. Good you mention that. Candidate forum actually is Thursday. It's at the Legion, and I'm not sure what time it starts. Is 7 o'clock? Oh, you guys would probably know. Jack, did you get that email?
That's right.
Okay. 7 o'clock on Thursday? Oh, okay, live stream on WBEV. Yeah, at the Legion. The other candidates that should be there are Mr. Bourne and I'm not sure who, Latoya? Okay. All right. Any other announcements? That was a good one. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to disposition of minutes. You should have the minutes in front of you from the September 16th meeting. Is there any, well, can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Make a motion to approve.
Okay, motion by Alder Zopp and a second by Alder Burnett. And so is there any discussion or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay. We'll move on to presentations and reports. I do have to read a proclamation, easy for me to say. Is there anyone here representing the White Cane Safety Day? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to sit here and do it then. So the City of Beaver Dam Office of the Mayor is proclamating that White Cane Safety Day. Whereas on October 6th, 1964, the United States Congress designated October 15th of each year as White Cane Safety Day. And whereas blindness and severe visual impairment affect approximately 109,000 Wisconsin residents, and whereas the majority of these persons use travel aids, such as white canes or service animals, to get around public streets and sidewalks and places of public accommodation, and whereas these travel aids are universally recognized as symbols representing vision loss, and whereas Wisconsin's white cane law requires that motorists come to a full stop before approaching closer than 10 feet to a pedestrian who is using a white cane or service animal. And whereas greater awareness of the white cane law leads to safer, more attentive driving in general, enhancing the safety of all pedestrians, including children, elders, and people with disabilities. And whereas communities have the opportunity to implement many proven features to enhance the safety of all pedestrians, including sidewalks, accessible pedestrian signals, and curb ramps. Now therefore, I, Michael Wassell, Mayor of the City of Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, declare Tuesday, October 15th, 2024, to be White Cane Safety Day in the City of Beaver Dam, and also acknowledge the importance of pedestrian safety year-round. Dated the 7th of October, 2024. So, that's a good thing. Moving on, we have the city administrator report.
Just a couple of things to pass along. First off, just a reminder with budget process. So we had our budget workshop a week ago. Staff have been working diligently. We are planning on having the draft budget presented to you at the next council meeting, so 2 weeks from today. We've been able to take the feedback that you gave us and apply it. Those that were not able to attend the workshop, if you want to meet with me and I can brief you and even take any other input that you might have, feel free to set up a time. I'd be more than willing to meet with you and kind of review what was discussed. With that tonight, we will be on the agenda. We're going to be reviewing kind of the last part of what we weren't able to cover in the workshop. So we'll be reviewing the utilities this evening. The administrative committee, they met today. We discussed the WRS unfunded liability. And after looking at both the 10-year and the 5-year, we took the tentative direction of doing the 5-year. If you have questions for those that aren't on the committee and want to either talk with members of the administrative committee or with myself, feel free. But we'll plan on also bringing that to the full council for discussion at the next meeting. The last item that just to pass along, and this is mostly to just keep this date in mind, November 1st, it's a Friday evening. The fire department has their annual pinning ceremony. Council members are more than welcome to attend. It's at 6:30 p.m. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Communications, do we have any letters today?
We have no communications tonight.
Okay, let's move on to paying the bills. Is there a motion to take care of the bills from September 13th through October 3rd? Yes, go ahead.
As they were approved by the administrative committee, I will move to approve the bills this month in the amount of $1,830,500.22.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second to that? Thank you, Alder Hiley. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any additions, corrections, or questions about the bills that are in front of you? Okay, seeing none, please take the roll. Or is that a yes or no? Okay. All in favor of paying the bills, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Anybody abstaining? Okay, motion carries. We'll pay the bills. Moving on now to what Nathan mentioned a minute ago, the 2025 draft budget presentation for water, wastewater, stormwater, and solid waste utility. Looks like Kayla is going to introduce that.
All right, so a few things that we'll cover tonight. You can go to the next slide. Yep. Just some considerations for the utility budgets. And we'll go through a budget overview similar to what we did for the general fund budget, and then we'll talk about rates. So some utility considerations. We're currently conducting a full rate case with the PSC for water. So we're still kind of in the middle of that, looking to implement at some point in 2025. They did have some questions that they had asked utility staff and myself, and we had gotten them back to them maybe about a month or so ago, and still just waiting for them to kind of go through all of that yet. Last year we had, for sewer, we had discussed, there was a study that was done for wastewater, and they were recommending a 20% increase. It was more favorable by council to do more moderate increases. So last year we had done a 5% increase, and we had talked about continuing that over the several years to make up that 20%. Stormwater, we discussed to do the same. So last year we did a 5% increase and talked about doing that over the course of several years. The garbage contract is not something that we talked about much last year, but it does have a 3% increase each year in that contract. We currently have a deficit within that fund, and in fact, in this entire year, we have been cash flowing negative. So that's something we wanted to discuss for next year's budget. So looking at water, we have the total revenue. Again, I mentioned we're in the middle of the full rate case. If you recall that Ellers presented an expected 31% increase. What we used in the budget here is closer to a 24% increase, figuring they wouldn't have all 4 billing cycles in 24 or in 25 for that to be implemented. So took 3/4 of that, 24% increase. The general expenses, that largely represents some interest expense differences between 24 and 25 for budget. Labor expenses reflects mainly the cost of living increase that we discussed during the workshop that was applied to the general fund. We also had some right sizing of how time is actually being allocated to the utilities by either the other utility or by Department of Public Works staff. And we basically looked at the 3-year averages to be able to look and determine what seemed more adequate to how they were charging their time.
And as far as the water operational expenses and that increase, that's primarily due to chemical cost increase. We've been seeing between a 5% to a 15% increase the last few years. Hydrated lime, which is used in lime softening process, that's the largest chemical expense, and that is estimated to increase approximately 10 to possibly 15% this upcoming year. That accounts for the majority of the increase. But then we do have a few other maintenance items with the last upgrade being in 1996. We are approaching the plant being 30 years old. So we do have a few items to address as far as valves and actuators and a CO2 controller that is starting to fail that we need to replace.
So then for the administrative expenses, there's a slight decrease from 24 to 25. In that section includes health insurance and life insurance costs. And with some of the staff that transitioned from either had left to different positions or what have you, the new staff coming in elected different insurance coverages. So we had a family that went to an opt-out and a family that went to a single. And so when you're talking 20-some $1,000s for insurance costs, that is pretty easy to make a swing there. So just a slight decrease, even though our insurance cost is slated to increase by 6.5%. And then debt service, this one, there was a little bit of a typo in the packets that provided for you. The debt service for 25 that was listed in that packet was actually not including the 2024 borrowing. I had compiled that number prior and just didn't update it once I got the debt service payment schedules broken out. So once you change that, there's actually a slight increase, but you would kind of expect that because our 24 borrowing did include 2 years. In here, there is also our 2015 borrowing comes off. So kind of a merge of those two is what you see for the change there. And then Nathan, I think you were going to talk about the net revenue and depreciation.
Yeah, I'll just mention this once, and you can kind of see this in the other utilities. But one thing to just be thinking about is your net revenue after your expenses. That's your ROI, right? So after your revenue and your expenses, that's kind of the balance remaining. And a good rule of thumb is from an equipment replacement or from a replacement value is to see that is on par with depreciation, right? Depreciation is an audited number. They're determining how many assets you have and then, devaluing those assets over time. And so if your net revenue and your depreciation are close, what that means is that you're going to be able to, instead of using debt service, you're going to be able to use that net revenue to continue to replace. And so one thing to point out is that with the change of rates, with the rate case that water underwent, you can see that net revenue and that depreciation are now more aligned. They're very close. As we go forward, you won't see that in your sewer and in your stormwater. So just, I pointed out just to have that in kind of the back of your mind that's a good litmus test for kind of the health of a fund.
All right, so then with wastewater, the revenue, again, during the budget workshop last year, we had talked about the study that was performed by Applied Technologies that was recommending a 20% increase. Again, we're looking at more moderate increases, so we did a 5% last year. In this budget, we did reflect a 5% increase. This year, we also had some additional adjustments for the commercial and industrial users that came on in 24 and expected in 25 as well. General expenses, the reason you see a decrease in there is we actually no longer need to budget for the lease payment for the Vector jet. We bought out that lease payment, so we were able to remove that from the 25 budget. Jeremy, did you want to? Oh, I guess I have labor too. Labor, it's really just, again, that cost of living increase. And then again, just adjusting for the allocation that staff are actually charging time to this utility based on that 3-year average. So you see a slight difference in the percentage overall, but it's again, just that right sizing of those allocated hours.
All right, as far as wastewater operational expenses, similar to water, much of the increase is related to chemical costs, and that increase, estimating approximately 5 to 10% increase in 2025. And the largest one is our phosphorus reduction chemical. We will also have more restrictive limits during our next permit term, which begins in 2025. So the feed rate will have to increase for the NEO, which is the phosphorus reduction chemical. So that accounts for approximately half of the operational expense increase. Again, with a plant that was built in the 80s, we're approaching 40 years old for the plant with some upgrades in 2010. But we're looking at some maintenance to the HVAC system and boilers, some upgrades to controls and equipment for phosphorus reduction chemical treatment, and then also some concrete floor rehab in some of our buildings.
Okay, and then the administrative expenses, you'll see mainly here that just that cost of adjustment for the insurance cost. There was also some we increased the budget for the expenses for administrative services to be able to provide those bills. So the printing services, postage, things of that nature had been budgeting a little low compared to where we were actually landing at year end. So just adjusted for that for 25. Debt service, again, the 25 number that you have in your packet did not include the 24 borrowing, 25 payments. So we did update that here. Again, that's that 2 years where we borrowed in 24 for 23 and 24 projects. There weren't any additional payments that were falling off based on the borrowings for the payment schedule for 25. And then Nathan mentioned he's not going to repeat for the net revenue and depreciation, but you see that in this fund, we're significantly off in that net revenue and depreciation. Stormwater, again, last year in the workshop, we talked about the moderate increases. This does include a 5% increase. There were some other adjustments to some revenue based on numbers of where we were landing from budget to actuals over that 3-year average, but for the most part, it's that 5% increase. General expenses, pretty moderate increase, not really a lot to comment on there. Labor increases, again, or labor expenses, again, just that cost of living increase. Todd, I'll let you talk about operational expenses.
So operationally, we're pretty similar to last year. That $50,000 adjustment is mainly due, we're having our stormwater quality master plan updated this year. That's a $50,000 item. So obviously that one's falling off. So that's the bulk of the change there.
And then I believe in your packets for the stormwater, the operational expenses were actually overstated. The formula that was in the worksheet or the workbook, the Excel workbook, actually didn't remove the labor from the total operation costs. So it was overstated by those labor expenses. The administrative costs, really just some inflationary cost of living increase as far as the insurance, things of that nature. Debt service, again, that 25 includes both the 23 and 24 projects for stormwater. But you'll see that the net revenue is a little different than what was presented in your packets. But you can see that, again, we're not really kind of covering that depreciation quite in this fund at this point. Solid waste utility. So we did not include any increase in this budget, just because we wanted you to be able to see kind of what has happened in this fund since we've created it. And we hadn't really discussed this in prior, like at the last budget workshop, like we did with the other funds. Labor expense, there's a little bit of a reduction in there. Again, that's just that right sizing of where the staff, like the DPW staff, are charging their time versus what we had originally budgeted. Operational expenses, so that kind of reflects that 3% increase that's in that contract. Administrative expenses, we didn't have anything budgeted for '24. So with the utilities, they do a cost share or a prorated cost of these administrative services based on an allocation of what their revenues bring in. With this being a new fund, we didn't have those revenues to be able to allocate, so none of those expenses in '24 were allocated that way. But we were able to use that for, well, I should say in '23, it wasn't allocated that way. In '24, we were able to start allocating, but we hadn't budgeted anything, so we didn't really know what to budget. And then now in '25, we have an idea of what that cost is. So we included that in the budget here.
And Kayla, if I can just interject in this one. So, we created this in 2023. In part, this helped us to, close a deficit. And we knew that 24 and 25, we knew that we were going to need to, we didn't want to come back with just a rate increase. Even though we knew that the contract was going to go up 3%, we wanted to make sure that we had some history. And we were able to make sure that there was good balance and good understanding. Now that we're in 2025, I think from a staff standpoint, we're feeling very balanced in the fund. We feel like we've got things kind of where they're supposed to be. And you can see that, there isn't a depreciation in this fund because there's no assets in this fund. It's basically a contract. It's a pass-through. The one thing being that the labor expense is basically related to our time at the drop-off site, right? Because those are also solid waste type functions. So point is that, we do need to right-size this. And so just being aware of that and understanding what we're talking about when we're trying to get things back in order. So I think the next slide is on rates, Todd, and I said that I would kind of take this one on. So the 31% rate increase, that's what we're anticipating with the PSC. You kind of are aware of this. So the quarterly is the $27, the $28, and then yearly it would be the $111. The sewer fund, to just do the 5%, would be, just under $5, $18.64 on the annual. The stormwater fund, we'd be at the $1.05 and then $4.20 for the year. Solid waste, to get things kind of back where we're ahead of the game and kind of building at least a little bit of fund balance, is that $6.83 quarterly. Yearly it'd be $27. So the total impact across across the utility funds would be $40 quarterly, and then the annual would be the $161. We wanted to bring this to everyone. We wanted to make sure we got feedback. This isn't baked. This is just what we're bringing to your attention, and wanted to get some thought processes from the council. One thing I will point out is that, as we discussed in the budget workshop, right now on the median home, with us doing all of the new requests that you had kind of blessed or said, hey, let's move forward. We've used the levy. We've gone up to the levy limit, but no more. So if you'll recall from the slide, basically on the median home, you're going to see about a $97 reduction in taxes. So point is that there is some balancing here. It's not perfect. There is going to be an increase in utilities on the utility side. But one thing that I would point out is that it's to be expected. It's not like your operations have been held steady, right? When we look at the operational costs and the wastewater and solid waste and also in stormwater, all of them saw a rise much greater than the 5%. So we're trying to be approach this reasonably. The one thing I would throw out too is that we could reduce the solid waste fund rate increase and do kind of more spread out over the years, but it's going to take a little while to catch up. So with that, any questions from council or comments?
Yes, Alder Ken?
Just like to say, I told you so on the wastewater fund. It's dumbest idea this council has ever passed. It's just look at 15% is what they want to go up. This is ridiculous. Like, if you say it's going up 3%, why doesn't it go up 3%? Maybe we didn't do it last year. It should go up 6%. Oh, it's been 3 years? Okay, that's 9%, not 15%. That's ridiculous. We're just doing this so that you can spend money elsewhere that we don't need to spend. It's like, make it something reasonable, like maybe 10%, which is still unreasonable, but that's just way too high. Way too high. And I'm glad everyone in this room, oh, it's only $40 quarter. Well, that's fine. I remember when my quarterly bill for everything was $70. With this increase, it's going to be $250. And that's within probably about 12 to 13 years. That's a large increase. I can afford it. Yes. You can all afford it. I'm sure you all can afford it, which is why it's no big deal. Someone that's sitting on a fixed income, that's a lot of money for them to absorb. So just think about that when you're supporting all this spending. It needs to stop. It started with the downtown ridiculousness and it just keeps steamrolling. It's ridiculous.
Alder Fisher?
Alderman Anderson, you've been on the council quite a while. And a few years back, we realized that we had been doing a very poor job on watching the revenue in these areas. And we admitted that. And we knew it was going to take a price increase. And we had a big increase. And I'm sure that you received the same feedback I got. So this is just a continuation of the mistakes that we made back many years ago because we just didn't raise rates.
I take responsibility.
Alder Zot?
So if we went from a 15 to a 10, I guess first question, how long would it take to repay that? We have a deficit in solid waste. How long would that take to repay at 15%? And if we dropped it to 10, how much additional time would it take us to repay the deficit, right? Because you mentioned we have $100,000 deficit currently right now that you're trying to dig out of. So how long would 15%, how long would it take?
So the 15% would get us to right about even between what we have kind of listed as a deficit for this year and then also would get us a little bit ahead. So is there a little wiggle room? Yes. I just kind of wanted to present what would get us ahead of the game so we could do smaller increases like a 3% contract increase. I believe a 10% would get us about 98,000 a year, whereas a 15 gets us about 147 in additional revenue.
So we're somewhere, it has to be at least, so even at 10%, we're still running a deficit, but you're saying if somewhere in the middle, like a 12 or 13% gets us spot on paying for what expenses are. So, okay, all right, I understand. We're catching up to what it is. Okay, thank you.
Your favorite thing is that put that tape off. Making snow out there. I don't like the new general fund. We should
I don't like it either, but we can't lose money. We can't lose money on it either. It's supposed to pay for itself.
Alder Burnett?
I just want to acknowledge what Alderperson Fisher said, and I think there's a really good lesson in that, you know, you can kick the can down the road, but, you know, you got to pay and, you know, so I think if we can stay with it close, like somebody suggesting, say even 12 or 10, I think that's a great step forward. And I think that the main takeaway for me at least is that as other issues surface, when we have to deal with this, that we remember what the consequences are. So, thank you.
Alder Anderson?
Since we're on the budget, how much are we giving to the Chamber of Commerce this year? Above and beyond what's mandatory by the statute, because we have a special calculation. Does anyone have that figure?
So the only dollars that I'm aware of going to the chamber is specifically with the tourism.
Yes.
So besides that,
The hotel room tax.
yeah, the room tax. And so if I were to, I don't have that specific number. I can get it. I think it's 140-ish a year that we get in room tax, and so it's 70% of that.
So there's some money to dig out without a 15% increase right there. If we choose not to do that, which everyone loves them, so that's fine.
Alder Burnett?
The solid waste fund, we only collect that from residential and apartments up to 3. None of the businesses pay for it. None of the large apartment units pay for it, which they were paying before we went to this fee. It was spread out over the whole city and not just half the city. And now we're getting into trouble here where we're behind.
So just one point of clarification on that is that we're still against a levy limit, right? And this at least allows us to take control of the reins as far as the cost and it being an in and out. But point taken that the commercial and the industrial shared in a general burden when it was in the general fund. The issue being that, again, this is one of your larger contracts, your larger cost centers. And when it was in the general fund with 3% increases every single year, it was creating a financial burden. And you didn't have a lot of flexibility with it being in the general fund to just increase taxes, right? There were limitations.
Alder Appenfeld?
Does garbage go on here also as an additional fee?
That's the solid waste fund.
Yeah, this would be the garbage. So the 15% increase on the board would be onto the separate utility for the garbage pickup and recycling. Alder Anderson was next.
No, Jack.
Okay, Jack, go ahead.
I don't like to see the fees going up like that either. I mean, I'd like to see the break point even or just a little bit. I mean, 15%, and we're ducking money or bringing more money in we need. Maybe we can go down to 13%, you know what I mean, or 12 or 12 and a half. You know what I mean, get it where it's even or just above. I mean, the idea isn't to start building a stockpile of money, but just let's get the debt down and have a little cushion there, but not, for we have a lot of money sitting there. And the other thing I got is if I remember right, I just got on the council and Rob Ninema came and told us we had to raise the rates 25% one year because we were way behind. And boy, did we heard about it. I mean, it was just a riot. But we let it go too long. Instead of having a little increase every year, we let it go too long, and that's the best we could do. And now we're paying the piper again, you know what I mean? So we gotta somehow keep it up. And you could look at the village of Theresa, 120%, because they haven't raised their rates in years. They can't even get their water lines opened up. I mean, it's just, they can't even fill up their water tower. They don't have enough money. So this is what we're looking at.
Alder Anderson.
So with what Kevin brought up, it's not only the commercial, but it's the apartment complexes. They contract their own garbage service, so they don't pay this solid waste fund. My question is, they can still use the bulk drop off though, correct? And we get charged for that.
Yeah, they're not supposed to.
Yeah, okay. When we're telling you, as long as you're a resident of Beaver Dam, you can use bulk drop off. They're a resident of Beaver Dam. So I would request, if they're not supposed to, everything we put out on our Facebook page and in booklets and everything needs to say, except if you live in an apartment, you're not allowed. And let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And most people with apartments don't look at our Facebook page. But they don't get notices from the landlords. Alder Zop.
So I would agree with Alder Yuds. I mean, maybe we could give guidance that whatever the break even point is, if that's 12 or 13%, that's what we do so that we're not chasing this, always playing catch up. But if we were to get to even now, the next year, I would presume next year, we're just looking to get caught up to the baked in 3% increase that's in there. The waste, the solid waste contract, right? We're always going to have a 3% increase that's baked in. And that's part of this 15% is just catching up. So you get to break even, and then next year we would presumably just expect a 3 or a 5. I mean, do you have a prediction about what next year would be?
I would have to look further out than that, but I just want to clarify, like, just because the contract is a 3% doesn't mean we would need 3% in revenue from all of the users to cover that increased cost. So this includes the 3% contract, but then it also includes inflationary costs. I mean, there's insurance, and then also staff time, which increases with cost of living and insurance costs and things like that. So it's not just the contract cost.
So how much are we going to be looking at 10% every year? Or what are you saying?
I wouldn't
No.
suspect that. I'm saying I don't even know that it would necessarily be 3% because you have users that are charged charged that amount, and then that revenue is covering all your expenses. So just because the one contract expense line goes up 3% doesn't mean you need 3% in the revenue to cover that cost.
Got it.
Because your revenue 3% might be higher than what the 3% of the contract cost is. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. But that's
Just for a point of clarification too, if you look at this, so the quarterly cost, if it changed to 10%, I think Kayla, you have that number, it's like $4, right? So instead of 683, it's going to go up, I think it was like 440 something. And then you multiply that by 4 and that's that. Yeah. Right. Right. So just to have context of when we say 15%, sometimes, we don't necessarily know what the nominal amount. So just that we're clear, 10% is going to be about that 450 range per quarter, and then yearly just multiply that by 4. So, 18 bucks.
In other words, the solid waste is not the big spender.
No. And another point of clarification too. I mean, we took a very slow approach with sewer and stormwater, right? Where it's 5%, but it's going to be 5% for several years because, you know, we're got a 20% deficit last year, but you know, we add 5%. Well, that 20% isn't going to just go down 15%, right? It grows over time too. So if you so chose, we could do something similar with salt. Like there are other things, but when we look at a $4, I don't know. Like I think most people are going to see the water impact, and that's what's going to draw people's attention. So, but staff will take your input. We appreciate the comments that have come forward, and we'll try to bring something a little bit more cushioned. And we appreciate the cognizance that we do need to keep up with this, that it's not like it's free, right? We can be grateful that we don't have to use an outhouse.
Okay. Alder Anderson.
If the DNR would permit outhouses, I'm sure a lot of our residences would love to do that rather than pay this fee.
Until it's below
then,
freezing in January, but
Now on top of that, no. Now I seem to remember when this great idea of moving this off the general tax roll came to fruition, we set the rates at a certain amount and the fee was gonna be this, blah, blah, blah. And we insisted on making it even higher so that we could have a emergency fund balance. Oh, we can just rip the Band-Aid off here at the beginning. And I really like this, and this was a great idea. What happened to this additional fund that we had to have high rates to begin with for this? Because that's how it was sold to us. It was sold. It was like, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was this amount to get it set up and going. Or we could charge just a little bit more and we'd have a spare amount in there. And now we're running a deficit. So what happened with that?
I guess my recollection isn't maybe as good as yours, Ken. My feeling was that we tried to keep things fairly. What I recall is we said, hey, we want to have it be an in and an out. I think that we've maybe built in a little bit of cushion with the thought process that we wanted to make sure that we weren't running a deficit. But to be honest, we did not build in a 15 or a 20% cushion thinking that after 3 years it would break even, right? We built in a little bit of cushion. Kayla, I don't know if you recall the thought processes. I just remember us talking about it being an in and an out.
Yeah, I think you and John had primarily most of the conversations during that time frame. So I'd have to go back and look at kind of the notes and calculations that were used for that to be able to comment. But you know, I think there were some things that were a little unknown creating as its own fund. That I think there were some costs that were maybe not necessarily in just those areas in the general fund that now are applied to this fund that maybe were just missed in the original calculations. I really don't know. I'd have to go back to those
I forget.
notes,
That
but-
was, John was here. The other piece of this was that there was a 2-year, this was over 2 years. It wasn't just one year. I recall that too as well, that we I have to go back and remember. I just remember there was a 2-year, it was a phased approach that we didn't do it all in 1 year. And so we did not build in the 3%. We wanted to figure things out first before we started asking the constituents for more money for this fund. I will say this, that the cost of the contract in solid waste is going to continue to go up year after year after year. And from a general fund standpoint, this gives us better control of our destiny than having it remain in the general fund. So I applaud the decision that you guys made to move this. Because just because the cost went up didn't necessarily mean that you were going to make up any ground on the tax side. So I know that it's frustrating whenever costs go up, but and I'm sorry that I'm the messenger, the bearer of bad news, but costs will go up over time.
And I'll just add too that I know a number of residents that live outside of the city limits that have to contract individually. And they pay significantly higher than what we're doing as a group contract. And we're offering more services that are covered by this fee than just garbage and recycling pickup curbside. I know John Summers was one too that was astonished when he found out his neighbor's contract was that much less than his. Same garbage service, same route, just negotiated contracts differently. So the individual contracts this is still a much better deal, having a group contract rate for the service.
Alder's up.
So I recall the conversation that Alder Anderson is referring to about the phases or the parts or the steps that were sold to us. And I recall it as you could do trash only, trash plus recycling, right? That is the total package. I don't recall any sort of trash plus recycling plus slush fund. I don't recall that. We had to pick and choose between recycling only or trash only or both. Those were the steps that was presented to us. That was it. There was no that plus slush fund. So we went with the decision to accept and all the pieces, trash plus recycling. That is my recollection of how it was presented to us and the decision that we made you referred to as the in and out costs in, cost out. And I think that's where Alder Yuds and I think probably the rest of many other alders are thinking, let's just have it be an in-out cost equivalent so that we're not generating excess revenue. That wasn't the point of the program, but just have it be a pass through to the resident. So.
Alder Yuds.
I'm just out of curiosity. I won't say residents, but the people outside of the city who have city water and sewage, are they paying the same rates we are in the city, or they got different rates? Jeremy?
Come to the microphone, Jeremy.
So those few that are outside the city limits pay a 25% surcharge.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure. Thank you.
Alder Anderson.
Do they have to abide by the same rate study increases?
Correct. Yep. Any increase would apply to them and then a 25% surcharge on top of that.
Okay, who gets to define the 25% surcharge? Is that controlled under the rate committee also?
That's set in our rate. Yeah, our rate charges that anyone outside the city limits is a 25% surcharge.
Okay, can we increase that and make it 65%?
Rick?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Like with rates for water, especially that's going to be governed by your tariff with the PSC. For sewer rates, the only guiding principle is that's not controlled by the PSC. It just can't be prejudicial.
Oh, I'm not president. Yeah. Everyone outside the city will have to pay the same.
Yeah. So I'd be more hesitant on the water side just because that's governed by the PSC tariff for the city. On the sewer side, you have a lot more flexibility.
But just for clarification, Jeremy, we don't have that many people using city water, right? Most of it's sewer?
Mostly sewer, yes. One mobile home court does have water.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that's something that we should investigate to get, this overall fund is those sewer rates, because there are quite a few people that's You know, the new one, you know, whole townships are pumping to us and using our aging facilities. So, you know, we really ought to be thinking about adjusting that.
We can definitely evaluate that, and that would come forward, I believe, in our fee schedule resolution, which will staff we can review and discuss with legal too, and make sure that we're within appropriate bounds.
Alder Wild.
I have a question here now, and this is sort of personal because it relates to the place where I live. Kayla says that a group price for trash and recycling is cheaper than private. So I'm still curious why the city won't pick up our trash and why where I live, we're forced to have a private pickup because we pay taxes in the city. We have city water, city sewer, and yet we have to contract for trash and recycling. I don't really understand that.
I don't know all the reasons. We're mid-contract with the contractor doing the solid waste pickup now. It was discussed the last contract if there would be any interest for this contractor or other contractors. The current contractor was not at all interested. If we went to more stops, they would have to have, we're at their limit now for the numbers of trucks, the staffing they have, the tonnage that they pick up here that they can handle at their facility. They would not be interested in even giving us a bid for our contract this last time if we included all the motel or all the apartments, the associations, the condo associations. They were limited. They gave us the price they gave us for the number of stops that we have. The next contract renewal will pursue that then, but we are mid-contract right now with the contractor.
When does that expire?
So just to put a pause, or because if I'm and Todd, you can maybe jump in. I just want to make sure that there's an understanding that your specific condo association, that was a decision that was made by the developer at the time based on the road type, and instead of going to the legal street widths and things of that nature, that kind of prohibited or it created some. Is that?
I think that's a different.
Is that a different one? Okay.
But it does play back on ordinance too, where we don't pick up for 40 units or more, or however that reads. So that is ordinance, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so the question going future, when you get to the end of a contract, would be to see if it's worthwhile to separate out condos versus apartments. Because some of the condos are just a string of attached houses versus having a multi-30 unit. You know, there's two different distinctions there, and that should be separated.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
I guess my question was, when does this contract expire so that I can get involved in maybe changing that?
Yeah, I think Kayla maybe can check that.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I believe it goes through 26, but I'd have to look to be sure.
Okay.
Dan, do you know for sure? Okay.
Okay, any other comments on the draft? Sounds like we had some good input, and our city administrator is going to see what he can level off.
Well, I want to applaud Kayla and staff. They really have taken a lot of effort, or put a lot of effort into this budget season, and appreciate Kayla making the presentation. I would point you to, we didn't go through the CIP. Oftentimes, there isn't a lot of question about CIP. I know we touched in brief about it at the budget workshop, but I wanted you to realize we did include it again. And so if there are any questions regarding the CIP, please feel free to reach out to me. I don't think there's need to go into too much depth tonight. The water, but just to be brief, water and sewer basically follow along the street program. And then any equipment, we reviewed that equipment with you at the workshop. So thank you. Kayla, is there anything else? Okay.
Okay, that was just for discussion tonight, so we don't have to take any action on that one. So move on to resolutions. Resolution number 81, 2024.
Resolution number 81-2024, adopting a First Amendment to a developer's agreement for 1645 North Spring Street LLC.
Seeing how this isn't something that we do every day, Trent is here to give us an update.
Yeah, thank you. So this is really a matter of administrative housekeeping. The Harbor Freight, excuse me, I had last week what you have this week, so still getting over it. The Harbor Freight deal and the redevelopment of the mall, the second incentive project we took part in. This amendment relates to that project. All has gone well. We were looking for a long-term lease with Harbor Freight, stabilize the property further, get it on a traditional banking schedule, and finally bring that property out of a risk factor into hopefully prospering and preventing blight. All has gone well. Harbor Freight is in. There was a $900,000 estimated investment. Developers went over that in total cost. We had a capped amount of 180. That's what we're still intending on putting out. We always want our deals to match the letter of the agreement, and we used a template agreement for this project that was very similar to the Marshalls, Ross, and Five Below deals. We stack all kinds of protections for the city in these, I think wisely. We might have gone overkill on one item. That's what we're trying to amend tonight. So we did require 3 bids on all work items. As the project got going, Harbor Freight required to self-improve the inside of the facility while the developers improved the outside of the facility and the lot. The costs of that were passed through to the developer in the form of rental reductions, okay, reflected in the lease rate. So the costs are absorbed by the developer, but obviously we don't have any hook or hammer on Harbor Freight to say, show us your bids for your shelving and, you know, everything that they were doing on the interior of the property. The reason I say it's probably overkill, and if we were to do a deal like this again, we'll always keep all these levels of protection like we have. When the developer is paying more than 80 cents on every dollar for these improvements, what possible motive do they have to inflate the costs, right? I mean, they'd be crazy. That would be a self-inflicted wound. I think we've carried this over from deals where we had a far more prominent position in terms of financing something. With Harbor Freight self-performing, with these costs being a pass-through, the developer did provide the city with bids on, you know, their outer work. The only one they didn't was a design build on the electrical because it was pretty intricate. Hooking it into the older mall facility wasn't really a bid type job. It was find somebody, design, and do it. All is good. We just want the deal to match the agreement and amend it as such. And Larry just pulled out the 3-bid element in that deal. They have performed. Time for us to perform. If you guys approve the amendment, we'll get it signed. They'll execute. the subordinated mortgage document, and Kayla and Nathan and company can get to funding this and wrap it up. So any questions, happy to answer them, but I think it's a pretty simple administrative matter.
Any questions?
Thank you all.
Okay. I do need a motion. Alder Burnett,
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution.
is there a second? Alder Fisher. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Appenfelt,
Aye.
Onet,
Aye.
Burnett,
Aye.
Barry,
Aye.
Fisher,
Aye.
Eiley,
Aye.
Keel,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Perkins,
Aye. Aye.
Wild,
Aye.
Yeds,
Aye.
Zop,
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Okay, resolution passes. I'm now looking for a motion to adjourn from Alder Burnett.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second from anyone? Alder Wild. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed?